Welcome to Being Curious podcast show with Counselling Reflections, a podcast where we dive deep into the human experience, uncovering stories of resilience and triumph. We are proudly supported by Moskin, a UK-based skincare line infused with sea moss.
Hi, Maya. My name is Cornetta Williams-Walker, and I do a program called Being Curious with Counselling Reflections. Maya, thank you very much for agreeing to be on our podcast. Please let people know or just tell us a bit about yourself so we can get a sense of who you are and what you do and where you're located, Maya.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. So I'm in Los Angeles, California, and I work remotely as an EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing therapist, and I'm also a couples therapist. Along with my therapy practice, I also am a relationship coach where I focus strictly on helping individuals form healthy attachments, having a secure attachment style. And also, if individuals are struggling with just forming connections with, it could be coworkers, friends, anything platonic or romantic. And so that's what I do in Los Angeles. I'm also a SAG-AFTRA actor as well here in California. So I implement my art-based skills and background when I work with clients as well. So I would say I have more of a niche market where I use that social emotional arts in my healing aspect with my clients as well.
I have so many questions that are actually, I'm quite excited. And I suppose my first question would be, how did you get into your work and what made you go into the area of therapy that you've kind of are now you currently using as a profession?
Yes. So I've always had this love for just helping people in general. And when I started out growing up in the arts, ballet, jazz, tap, music. And as I got older, I realized that I really had a love for psychology and just mental health. My mother, she suffered with depression when I was growing up. My father, he had his PhD in psychology. He was a therapist. My mother also was a social worker, and I was the artist. So I always wanted to integrate those 2 areas into doing something I love as a career. So when I graduated from UCLA in 2021, I started my mental health coaching business where I was focused on wellness and care, and I did everything remotely. And during that time, during COVID, I did a lot of certifications and training in social emotional arts, also in mental health. And I realized as I was doing my business that there was more trauma work that I needed to learn how to do. So I went back to school and got my degree in clinical psychology and focused on marriage and family therapy. And so now, not only am I a relationship coach, I'm also an EMDR clinician as well. So that's how everything, I guess, came full circle for me.
That's amazing, isn't it? Because you're at home with your mum and dad who are in what supporting community and mental health. And you could describe yourself really as an artist and
Yes.
a performer. What's kind of swayed you into the direction of wanting to integrate these ideas that you have around practice?
Yes, I would say because I watched my mother struggle with depression growing up. And it was really hard watching her and not knowing what to do, not really understanding, and also having anger towards her because I didn't grow up with my mother and father. We grew up in two separate homes. I met my father actually later in life when I was 18. So I feel that I personally had a lot of resentment towards just not having, I would say, a stable life for myself. And therapy actually helped me a lot to heal from trauma, from my own depression, and just struggling as a person. And when I saw how much therapy helped me, and also the arts, how, acting, theater, writing, poetry, all of those things together helped me, I said that there's other people I know that they're out there like me, especially people of color who they don't necessarily connect with traditional forms of therapy. However, they do connect with art. I really wanted to find a way that I could help them.
So, like, just thinking about kind of the experience that you've had, you've come from a two-parent household, you didn't see your dad till late, and then mum has had depression. Depression related to mum's relationship, or was it an organic mental health kind of depression?
Well, she was diagnosed with clinical depression, and she told me that she had it all of her life. So I would say that it probably ran in the family as well. Just her growing up, she said she always struggled with that.
And then for you at home, you're the only child at home.
I am. I'm the only child on my mother's side. My father had other kids, so I have half sisters and brothers.
Mm. How did you kind of navigate mum's depression? Because I can imagine you'd have seen lots of different versions of mum. One when she's present, and then when she's having a depressive episode, you might have not had her in the way that you needed as a young child.
Yes, it was very hard. I would say I have a lot of resentment towards her, not as I use the term now with clients, and they use the term with me, they weren't parented
Mhm.
correctly. And I feel the same way. I feel that I was not parented um
Mm.
as a child because I had to parent my mother instead. And even now with our relationship currently, um, it struggles, I would say, because of that disconnection
Mm.
we struggled with, and so I recognize that I'm still personally, and I have an EMDR therapist myself, and just constantly working on understanding how healing works. Healing can be a lifelong process, and that's okay. So I know that there's got to be a reason why I went through what I went through, and I wanted to see how I can help others who also have struggled in similar areas as me.
I'm listening to you, Maya, today, and I'm recognizing my own lived experience by things that you're saying. I remember when I kind of was aware that my mum had severe mental health, schizophrenia, that just wanted to be a normal child and wanted to have a normal relationship with my parents. So that kind of anger, or just it's a lot, isn't it, for a young person, and the trauma that you go through trying to, whether it's a small T trauma or a big T trauma, over a lot when you're a child. And often children, don't they, take on the responsibility of the parents or are doing the parenting from a young age.
Yes, exactly. It was definitely traumatic, I would say. Along with that, the other area that we struggle in is when I had experienced some abuse from a neighbor. So that was traumatic. That happened as a child. And that's another reason why therapy really helped me a lot in that area. And also, when me and my mother experienced being unhoused when we lived in a car and actually in Brooklyn, New York. We lived between I remember it was a blue station wagon And then we lived in a shelter for a while. So I would say probably 3 or 4 years. We went from sleeping on couches in a car when we were living in New York, and that was a very traumatic time, I would say, and that also, caused resentment, towards, my mother, and just her already being sick with clinical depression, not taking her medication, then also just having such an unstable living environment growing up, just everything, caused me to act out a lot, and having that foundation of having a therapist, really did help me to have support when I didn't have any.
Well, what was therapy like in the States? Because I can imagine here in the UK, our young people are really struggling. There's the CAM service, which is like a children's and young persons mental health service, is overprescribed. In some areas, there's a waiting list for up to 3 years. And often, although we're trying to address it, often it's not culturally connected to the families that we work with. Given that maybe London's more diverse, maybe the big cities are more diverse, but sometimes young people are less struggling. For you, counselling was really useful. So, what is the American model like, counselling young people and adults?
Well, I would say that previously for me, when I had it as a youth, it wasn't as easily accessible as it is now. Um, I know that I worked before I became a therapist, I was actually a crisis counselor, and I worked remotely on a 24-hour crisis line that was dedicated I worked in two different areas. One was for just individuals in Washington state, and then I worked for another crisis line that was specifically for youth. So this was a text crisis line, so youth could just text and say how they're feeling and say what they're struggling with. And the other department I worked in, they could call on the phone, and that was just for everybody. So I know that, and there's also crisis lines like the Trevor Project, where it's for up to I think 25 years old that it's dedicated for youth up to 25. And now there's so many ways that youth can access this mental health support. And I remember working on, I think it was in high school, another crisis line where it was specifically for youth that were trained to answer crisis calls for other youth. So you got to talk to other people that were your age that were being, of course, monitored and supervised by adults, but it was specifically catered to other youth so that they would not feel uncomfortable. So there's so many various ways, and all these options and resources are all free. So no one has to pay for them. As far as just calling in on the phone or texting, all those options are free, and they can call or text as much as they want.
So that's a really good model, isn't it? Because I know that some families can't afford therapists, whether it's for their child or whether it's as an adult, that you've got resources that are free where people can kind of text and use in the way that they needed. Was it culturally appropriate when you were having therapy? Did you need that? Did you need that? And what would that look like for you as a young person then?
Yeah, I would say culturally for me, it was the norm in my family, and that's because, my mother was a social worker, my grandmother, she was a nurse. My father, he was an immigrant here to the States. He's from Trinidad. So he started out just as getting his associates and worked his way up to get his PhD. So of course, although maybe in Trinidad, it may not have been, I guess, the norm for people to go to therapy. For whatever reason, I never asked my dad. because he's now passed away. But I've never asked him why he became a therapist and why he chose that, career, and how that was culturally for him in his community, in the Caribbean community. But I know that my sister, she also got her PhD and she's also a therapist as well. So
So there's something
they,
connected in your family on both sides, by sounds, where therapy or supporting the community and mental health in particular is really important. And I think you're right, because my family come from St. Vincent. So I know when I've gone back to the Caribbean, me saying that I'm a therapist, no one really understands, you know, they because they tend to kind of either get it through the church or through the barbers or through other avenues, or just can't afford to pay for someone to
yeah.
speak to. So there's something in your family that kind of connects with you. How did you kind of navigate your own identity? Because you kind of went into like EMDR and why EMDR when there's lots and lots of modalities in therapy? How did you kind of work your way through your own identity, carving out your own ideas about therapy?
Yes, that's a really good question. What I would say is, when I started my coaching business originally, I just felt that, I could help people in wellness. However, when I saw that there was a really strong need for trauma work, that's the reason why I went into therapy. And I remember in my clinical training, I had a clinical supervisor who said to me, "Maya, I think you'd be really good in trauma. How do you feel about that?" And I said, "Well, I'm interested in it, but I feel a little bit intimidated because I don't know if I want to deal with the big T trauma clients." And I worked at actually two different clinical practices when I was in grad school. One of them was a private practice, all remote, and the second one was an addiction center. So when I was at this addiction center, it was very intense therapy going on, because the clients that came in, they were detoxing for all different types of drugs. They have all different types of addiction, drug addiction, sex addiction. And during this time, that's when I realized that talk therapy is not going to help them. This is not going to allow them to heal the way they need to heal. They need more than this. And so my clinical supervisor at the addiction site, he introduced me to EMDR and also somatic therapy. And he explained to me how important EMDR was for severe trauma. And many of the clients at this addiction center, they had severe trauma. And once I start learning about what EMDR did and the benefits of it, that's when I realized after grad school, I wanted to invest my time into actually paying to be trained. And when I went through the training, I actually did a BIPOC EMDR training. So specifically all clinicians of color. And during this training, when we performed EMDR on each other just to practice it out, I personally saw clinicians, their lives being transformed like in that moment. Even me, I remember I had my very first EMDR session in training, and the very next day I felt completely renewed, refreshed. Like I had this new sense of happiness. Like I could see the benefits. I could see it working even just in one session. And I said, "Oh my gosh, this is really powerful."
It's interesting that you're saying that, because I think my supervisor currently is doing an EMDR training, and one of my supervisees is interested in those areas, and I suppose like ourselves, we have to continually do personal development throughout our year. And And I think EMDR has just been I agree with you. I think it's such a powerful, transformative way of looking at trauma, and also the embodiment of somatic training that one can be healed by talking, that actually being aware of our body and our sensations and our feelings are just as powerful. But it's really interesting that you're doing a course, because I think, I want to do that course.
Yes, I actually finished it in I think it was October, and no, yeah, so it was a couple months ago. It was recently that I finished my EMDR training. So I'm fully trained in EMDR.
So is it like 3 blocks, is it? Or is it a longer session, like a year?
No, it's actually a couple months that it took me a couple months in my training. Um Yeah, it was 2 different separate, sections that they did it in. You did part 1, and then you practice it. You actually had to, get hours signed off, so you had to do so many hours, for supervision and training, so I did all of that. Then you came back and did part 2, and so, yeah, those were the 2 parts.
Can I just ask you, Maya, why did they think it was important to do one for people of colour? Oh, was it so, you know, for your practice and for I suppose the organisation, you decided that was really important area to focus on?
Yes, because the majority of the patients and their clients that I have are people of color, and I want to help. I hear all the time, I'm in this community where I have other black people I talk to on a daily basis. I'm heavily involved in the Black Student Union at UCLA, Santa Monica College. I was very invested in working with my specific community, and I feel that there is a shortage of Black therapists that work with trauma, and so I wanted to be in a training program and group with other clinicians of color that was actually invested in their own community the way I was. So that's the reason why I did a BIPOC EMDR training specifically, and I feel that there is needs that people of color have and also Black people have that other communities don't have, and I wanted to cater to those needs and be um helped and supported by clinicians that looks like me.
It's interesting you're saying that, because I'm based here in the UK, and I think it's got better over the years. But in terms of training, there probably were only a handful of people on my course, and I trained. I think I'm coming up to my course about 14 years ago. Um, I think there was only about 5 of us doing my master's and mine's in addiction psychology masters. And I think it's interesting that in terms of looking and exploring community, my practice probably represents, like you, a diverse range, but predominantly people of colour, whether they come from Africa or British born or parts of the world, or locally within my community. And I think when I think about trauma, it's the intergenerational trauma as much as it is the present day trauma that they raise. You can see the legacy of their lived experience.
Yes, exactly. And that's the reason why I separate my practice and I work on both sides. So as a therapist right now, I can only work with clients in the state of California, but as a coach, I can work with anybody and any part of the world, which is why I feel it's important for me to have both of those practices because I don't want to just be able to just help people of color in California. There's people that could be in the UK and, in Africa, and I want to be able to support them as well, which is why I love the fact that I can service and provide these wonderful skills that I have as a therapist and a coach.
You talked about coaching and is it cultural vibrations is your practice, your coaching practices? Is that side of things?
Yeah, it's chill vibrations and mhm. And yes, I created the name chill vibrations because I want there to be a feeling of peace, of calm, and just rest. And my logo, it says just relax and chill, don't stress. um because it really is meant to be a place where clients can just visualize themselves just kicking off their shoes and just relaxing in an environment where they're going to be supported and not judged, and they can just let out how they're feeling and be able to get that support.
How does your practice translate online? Um, Both I suppose in your EMDR and in coaching.
Yes. Yes. So,
You what would clients experience?
yeah, so since I do both therapy and coaching completely remote, um when it comes to therapy on the therapeutic side, for EMDR, I use the bilateral stimulation of the ball, the bouncing ball back and forth. I use that on the screen a lot of the times. Or we can just do the touch, like the butterfly tapping um, technique for EMDR. I would say that there is sometimes hesitation for clients who are used to traditional therapy where they sit in person. However, studies have been done and shown that remote therapy is just as, I would say, I wouldn't just say important, I would say impactful is the word I'm looking for. Is just as impactful. What I found, yes, is that there is a study that was done, I think it was the 1970s, of um, there was a study done about how therapy works and how individuals are able to, I would say, heal. And it's called the Lambert's pie. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's Michael Lambert from 1986. So basically, this pie chart, and I show this to clients all the time in therapy and in coaching. It was made specifically for therapy, though. And this pie chart essentially shows that 15% of the factor of a client improving in therapy, only 15% of it is based on the therapeutic technique that you're using. Another 15% is the placebo effect, just like the expectancy of you getting better. But the 30%, which is a large part of therapy where the client actually improves and gets better, 30% of that part of the improvement is the therapeutic relationship.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if you're in person, if you're on Zoom, on the phone. If you connect with your therapist or your coach, the more you connect with that person, the more that you relax, the more you trust them.
I'm so in agreement with you because I
Mhm.
never thought when I first started training, I never thought that I would actually end up online. The majority, I still see clients in person, but the vast majority of my practice is online.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people open up more because they're at home,
Yeah.
in their own space, or they're in their
Mhm.
car. There are other things that come up, but generally speaking, I think the intimacy with someone online is
Yeah,
just as strong as actually seeing someone in person.
it is. Yeah, it definitely is.
And I definitely think that kind of therapeutic alliance is really important. And I think I think you're also right in terms of, how do you connect that there's lots of different. I think I read there's something like 500 different therapeutic models. There is something out there for everyone.
Exactly.
And I think when you kind of think about thousands of people who've been trained as therapists or as counselors or therapists, there are songs for everyone. Why do people come to see you, do you think? What is it about your practice that's so unique?
Well, that's a good question. I had to ask myself that also because that has a lot to do with how I market myself. And one thing that I've learned is that I had to really throw out the whole therapeutic modality from the whole focus because there's like you said, there's thousands of therapists, right? There's all different modalities. However, the connection is what matters the most. So what I do is I would say is more non-traditional way of putting myself out there. And the collective that I work with actually is in alignment with this. They're very transparent, which is not the quote unquote norm for therapists. So, what the collective I work with does is me and them, we put out right on the forefront, like, look, we are therapists, yes, but I personally have been diagnosed with ADHD. I have depression. I have anxiety. I'm just like you. So, what we do is we normalize a lot of struggles that clients may have. We put it right on the forefront and say, this is what we struggled with. There's other clinicians in the collective that say, I'm trans, I'm LGBTQ, I'm a survivor of sexual assault. They put it right on the forefront. And I feel that's what really makes me stand out personally as a therapist, that I'm very relatable. I'm someone who is not afraid to say what I have struggled with myself, and
It's
it
interesting.
helps clients. Yes.
I think it's really interesting you said that because I think some modalities people wouldn't share anything about. And I think
Yep.
there's a balance to be had as to what you share, how you share it. Well, I do think people want to kind of be with someone who they can relate to.
Yes.
I think in my kind of bio, I think I've also put about my own lived experiences as a way of saying, hey, I kind of understand what it might feel like to go through a set of experiences. They might
Yeah.
not be your experiences, but I have lived through a certain experience. How does the creative part, because I know that you kind of talk about the arts, and I'm curious, how does the collective work together? Is it a way of you supporting each other in terms of a peer group, is the collective, or do you kind of have a site where you all get together and advertise so it cuts down the costs? How does a collective work in therapy?
Yeah, so the collective that I work with, they were all advertised on their website. Um and everyone gets to, I guess, filter through and see who they'd want to work with. We're all in the state of California. That's the only area that they service is California. Um, so everyone can filter through and see the bio, for example, of everyone's bio. And I think it's one other person who also does social emotional arts. I personally don't really do any art based or social emotional arts in therapy. My main focus in therapy is very specific. I focus on EMDR in therapy, and I also have another practice I work with where I do couples therapy. So when it comes to therapy, I focus on trauma or couples. When it comes to my coaching, that's when I do more social emotional arts. And the reason why I do that is because for me, coaching, since when clients come to me where they don't have any big T traumas, they don't have any um extreme diagnoses where they need obviously a therapist. I focus more on attachment, relationships, and the reason why I do social emotional arts and coaching is because I work with a lot of clients in the entertainment industry. And so in this area, they don't need therapy per se. It's just goal setting, something more short term.
Mm.
Mhm.
There is a lot there that you've kind of just said in terms of how it works. The thing that comes up for me, I want to ask you what are the main issues people are struggling with, in Los Angeles or in Boreals in terms of couples? What are you seeing coming through your practice? What are the main concerns?
Yeah, so I would say that when I do a consultation call, usually the first thing that I would say I do, because I have to split, I have a split in the middle between therapy and coaching, right? I have to see if someone is having any extreme trauma. I ask that first. And number two, I ask, have you been diagnosed with any mental health conditions at all? Because if there is a need for clinical work and therapeutic work, then I take insurance on the therapy side. And that's when I have to say, okay, look, I have to work with you more on the clinical side. As far as the reason why on the coaching side, what I've been seeing in California, and since I work in an area, a state that there's nothing but artists here pretty much. It's very non-traditional. People have um as influencers, like social media influencers and a lot of artists. So the reason why I cater to them on the coaching side, because what I found in my as an artist myself in my community, there is a lot of isolation, disconnection, especially in LA. I would say a lot of people come from all different parts of the world to do various fields like art, music. And so people are having this need for knowing how to build healthy relationships, which is why I focus on EFT, emotionally focused therapy, attachment in coaching.
Mm, this is interesting, and I'm just thinking in terms of practice. I can see there are so many gifted, talented people who are
Mhm.
actually history in itself that they're interested in, which is good
Yeah.
for the brain because of the creativity. It's not necessarily good for the mental health.
Mhm.
So rejection, and if you struggle with attachment issues,
Yeah.
it's being quite difficult, can't it? And then you've got the small T, big T traumas
Mhm.
alongside everything else.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's where the need comes in. And that's why I mean, because in therapy there's so many rules, regulations, ethics. There's so many things you have to follow. And I'm okay with that when it comes to when I do this trauma work. I say, I understand there's a place for each area, I would say. For therapy, there's a place for it when there's a large trauma need, and then coaching for me is helpful because I don't have it's an unregulated industry, and I can have more freedom as an artist to work in different modalities and to switch things up. And also another reason why I would say that for people of color that they identify on the coaching side sometimes more is because there is not a stigma of diagnosing in coaching. There's no diagnosing. And I would say that I've spoken to people of color, specifically Black people, who they hate the idea of being diagnosed. And if, they meet me in a therapeutic environment, they're going to have a diagnosis.
Why is that? What's coming up there then? Why do people struggle with having diagnosis? What is a stigma around mental health? Or is it the label mental health they're concerned about?
Yeah, I feel that it's both. I feel it's a stigma on having this title or label on them, and also culturally too. I remember when I worked on the crisis line, I had a Latino family that called in, And that was one of the reasons why they didn't want to send their child to a therapist, because one of the individuals in the family had a mental health disorder, and the family members pulled away from them, and they didn't want that same label or stigma on their child. So they avoided the treatment that the child needed. And that happens very often. And a lot of families of color, like you said earlier, they say, let's just go to church, let's just pray about it. We don't need to go to a therapist. It's not important. However, people of color, the connection they have with the arts, with music, with dancing, um, especially in my community and Caribbean communities as well. Like, we love to dance, we love music. So I see more people of color saying, hey, oh, I would love to do something in the arts, and also it's going to heal me. That's just something that we naturally would be comfortable with, versus saying, oh, I'm going to go to a therapist. Oh, I'm not crazy. It's like this attachment, right? Oh, I don't need to go to a therapist. I'm fine. And they're really not fine, because we have all this generational trauma. And then, like you said, we have this trauma that's right now, this current trauma attached to the generational trauma. So I believe every person of color needs to be in therapy. Like, every single one of us needs to be. But that's not going to be the norm. Everyone's not going to think that and believe that. So I have to reach them in different ways.
Why do you, sorry to cut you, but why do you specifically feel that anyone should do? I'm kind of in agreement here with that sentiment. It's kind of interesting, but I'm just curious as to why you feel that uh, people kind of need to.
Yeah, because we have so much generational trauma. And if I just zero in and say Black people in the African diaspora, specifically, the amount of trauma that we've experienced, that our ancestors have experienced, there is no reason why every single Black person should not be in therapy. We literally have trauma happening around us the second we step foot out of the door. The type of racial profiling we experience, just driving in our car, walking down the street, our child going to school, child um being profiled, and these negative assumptions being put on us, and us having to go about our day, work, and it's traumatic. It's traumatic.
I'm listening to you, and I also recognize where I sit in the UK,
Mhm.
and a lot of what you said applies to people of color that's here in the UK. There are racial profiling, stop and search. We would describe that for young Black men. Then there's this portion of young youths and people in prison. There's this portion of diagnosed schizophrenia compared to the wider population. There's higher unemployment again in relation to graduates. Well, also in the context of people are really struggling financially. We're going through a financial crisis or adjustment here in the UK, and people generally, whether you're a person of color or whether you're in the wider community, Australia, are really finding it difficult. And you're right. I think also the fact that trauma can be switched on and off in terms of our environments.
And that's the other thing which you just mentioned. That's another key reason why Black people need to have therapy, because there is a block. There is a mental block in many of our minds and brains, that I hear Black people say this all the time. Money, people, and of course this could be different, because I don't hear this as much in the African community. My friends who are born in Africa, they don't have the same type of Black, in my opinion. But I can only speak from being born and raised in the States. Right here in the United States, what I notice Black people struggle with is they have a mental block with money. I hear Black people all the time say that white people have money. They're the ones who are rich. White people are rich. We can only get so far. They won't allow us to get so far. There's this mental block of not being able to be successful, and also not having this entrepreneurship mindset, which I feel that that's a block for us because Black people culturally, the whole African diaspora, we're a people that is very creative and we're business owners. I feel that is just our foundation. However, because of all this generational trauma that we've experienced and um, our families being ripped apart, literally, we have this big disconnection of who we are as a people and the fact that we're very powerful mentally as far as our creativity and our ability to transform and survive, our resiliency. And I feel that if that power was truly unlocked and we have that blockage removed, we can be a lot stronger and be more successful.
Do you think I'm listening to you and I'm wondering, do you think in terms of like the American or the African diaspora, those born intergenerationally from the States through some that pathway, do you think that is it the indigenous kind of Americans that are strong? Because I wonder, like, I think you're right. There's something about, my partner is Nigerian. Just him, he's king. He has lineages. He knows where his food comes from. He knows where his culture. He knows where his traditions are.
Yeah.
Like, I am a diaspora of St. Vincent, the Caribbean. We don't know what our heritage is, but I suppose we're on an island and we can see people being successful. Our presidents our bank managers are looking like us in a way.
Yes.
Here in the UK, things have changed enormously. We have more women in parliament. We have a more diverse parliament. And we now have, a conservative leader who has Nigerian heritage. I'm wondering what's going on because it feels like when I think about America, it feels like on one hand I see vast poverty, yet on the other hand I see extremely successful Black women. So what's going on here in our narratives? I'm thinking,
Yes, and this is the reason why in my coaching practice, I focus strictly on relationships. I saw a need where Black women specifically, you are correct. A lot of Black women here in the States are very successful. They have businesses, they have degrees, masters, PhDs, doctors, all these things, right? However, when I look at the men in the States, they're not as successful. And I feel, and I don't have the stats in front of me to know the exact stats. However, I can only speak from what I see. And I see a lot of the times that, and this is my opinion, that culturally, America, from what I can see, they have this cultural plan to create this quote unquote strong Black woman stigma. And I studied this in grad school where the Black woman is supposed to take this place. And this really, in my opinion, emasculates our men. And I feel this is all by design. And there's a strong Black woman stigma where Black women are more successful and they are not allowing our men to really be the leaders of the household. But it's not the Black woman's fault. I'm not going to put it on them. I'm saying that here in the States, I feel a lot of the times Black men, because they're so racially profiled, right? They want to take our Black men and put them in jail. They want to, my mom even said, during the Vietnam War, she said all the intelligent Black men were put on the front line in the war. It's like they really want to take away our king, right? They want to take away our leader, our protector, our provider, which is our Black man. And I'm so glad that there is a movement going on right now for Black men healing. Our Black men are suffering, and they are, I feel, not being as supported as they need to be. And they're not being respected and appreciated. And this is just my opinion. I know a lot of Black women may not agree with me, but this is how I feel. And I hear Black women every single day say, "Oh, I'm done with Black men. Black men are cheaters. They're liars. They don't know how to respect me." And Black men are listening to this all the time.
It's
And I don't know how you feel.
No, I'm listening to you and I'm smiling. There's lots of things that have kind of come up. I I came across some information around that 80% of relationships were, successful, but the narrative is the thing that we kind of worry about. We're struggling here in the UK, but I think within the Caribbean communities, maybe not other communities, I think there's a struggle in terms of a idea around what success looks like. Still, women are coming to therapy on their own. So speak to Black men who have really good relationships. I also think, who are we talking to? Are we talking about first generation, second generation, third generation, just newly arrived? You know, I think, when I listen to all those different conversations, whether you're African, whether you're Caribbean, whether you're, you know, from, South Asia, wherever it is, that everyone is on a journey. So yeah, I think it's a really good idea that you're kind of focusing on the relationships, the communication of relationship. And then I'm also thinking what's happening here in the UK, that a lot of young white men and the wider society are struggling with the success. For the first time, more women are buying their properties on their own. They are in positions of power and influence. And men generally, whether you're Black or white, are struggling with the change in the status quo, I think.
Oh, wow. Yeah, because I know I bought my first house when I was 25. I bought my first house by myself.
And I did as well. I think, so there's something going on in the system that I think there's definitely something culturally, within our communities. But I also think systemically in the wider community, there's something. But at the same time, influx of new immigrants coming in, of new ideas. My partner, is Nigerian, so conversation with him is kind of really interesting because I'm born Caribbean background and have kind of brought up in a single parent home, mental health and all these things. And generally speaking, he comes from a community of collective.
Exactly.
It's about the extended family, and he tells me about leadership, which might not always agree with.
And that's the reason why, and I don't want to put down my Black American men. I don't want to do this. Okay. I don't want to upset them. However, I personally stopped dating Black American men because I've noticed that when we have conversations, we go to date, they want to have a 50-50 relationship. They want us to, split the bills, and they want me to work full time, them work full time. That's just not how my ideal relationship is. I'm very traditional. My father from Trinidad, he was very traditional as well. And even though I didn't grow up with him, I still adapt that. So I personally, like you, I have been dating African men because there is no issue with 50-50. They know that as a man in their culture, they are the providers, they're protectors, they're paying the bills. They want their woman to be able to cook and clean. Some of them will say, well, look, we'll just get a maid. If you want to have a side business, that's okay. And that just fits better for me. And their mindset is totally different than Black American men.
How can we as a community heal everyone? I'm mindful that, that there are lots of different people. We haven't dated everyone and we don't know everyone. But
Yeah.
how do we move together as a community? Because men and women, it sounds to me, are struggling and wanting their needs met, regardless of what culture. Uh-huh. How do you feel that we can kind of change this?
Yes. Well, what I do personally when I work with either couples or individuals, the first thing I do when they get in the room with me, I ask them what are their wants, needs, and desires first for themselves. Like, how do they identify first as themselves? What is their self love? What is their love language? I go through all of these self love tools and we develop who they are, their foundation of who they are as a person. And then we look at the type of relationships they're attracting. Are they healthy relationships? So I feel before we can heal as, couples or in love, we need to first heal individually and have to really take a look and see what are we attracting and why. Are we attracting other damaged people because we're damaged ourselves? Do we have a secure attachment style? Are we attracting other secure people? That's important first because I truly believe that you do attract what it is that you are as a person. So when I developed a secure attachment style for myself, I started attracting men who are intelligent, who are successful, who are business owners, who are in alignment with me. So I hear a lot of Black women saying they're struggling to find a man. It's hard, quote unquote, it's hard to find a good man, but it's not hard. It's all about your mindset. Do you have an abundance mindset? I feel we have to start there, first of all.
What can we take away from today's session and from today's discussion? What do you want us to know about you? Or how can we find you?
Yes. So everyone can find me on my website on Chill Vibrations and also Maya Dajon. It's Mayadajon. That's my social media. And I would say the thing I would like people to take away from this session with me is that I want to be a resource for individuals who are struggling to find peace and love within themselves and to be that support system for them to help through their healing journey. And I really believe that every clinician, coach, they have individuals that are assigned to them. They have their own tribe of people that will connect and relate with them. So, whoever can connect and relate with me, I would just love to talk to them and see how we can work together and grow.
You do a combination of short-term, long-term therapy, do you?
I do. So in California, I do EMDR and I would say long term. In coaching, it's more goal setting and short term. And I do that, of course, anywhere.
Maya, do you know what? This has been such a wonderful conversation and really insightful. I feel like even though you're across the pond, it feels like you're so relatable to not only to your community in Los Angeles and to those who are artistic and arts, but here I think also people and individuals would relate to you really well here in terms, the coaching side of things and what you kind of offer.
Yes, thank you.
I can imagine that you've had an amazing 2024. What do you look forward to in 25? What do you hope for yourself, and what do you hope for your clients?
Yes. So for 2025, I'm hopeful for getting married. I would say I want to step into my marriage season this year.
Oh, let's.
As I hope for all of my clients who are trying to find love within themselves and also love with someone else. I am a huge romantic person, I would say at heart. I love love, whether it's just self love, which is the foundation, or finding your partner, finding your other half. That is one of the things that I would say I find the most joy in when I am able to help couples to really grow and flourish together, and individuals who want to be able to just be happy because they've had so much pain and hurt. I feel that's so important. Love is a beautiful thing.
On that note, I have nothing else to say. Thank you very much for being curious with Counselling Reflections. I really appreciate you being on our show today, and I hope you have an extraordinary 2025. I definitely hope marriage season is open for you and closed, and you find peace with your life. Thank you.
Thank you.